Good evening. Welcome to the January 18th Public Works Session of the Rockville Center Board of Education. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Emergency exits at the back on either side. Mr. Gavin, Superintendent's report.
Thank you, Madam President. I do have since we have 3 presentations tonight, I have a shorter superintendent's report than normal. I just wanted to remind everyone that for our weather updates, please check your email. I know it's supposed to snow tomorrow. We do not anticipate, I say again, we do not anticipate either a delay or a day off tomorrow. But please, your email, we will send an all-district blast if that ever does happen, where it would be a phone call, a text message, and an email all at the same time. So I just wanted to give everyone that little bit. We are heading off into the period where things are colder, and this seems to be, we actually saw snow for the first time in a really long time, so who knows. The other thing I wanted to apprise the board and the public, if you saw on Newsday, the governor has released her draft budget. In her draft budget, the Newsday did an analysis of state education funds and all of the districts, and I will tell you that, and Mr. Bartels will talk a little bit about this in his presentation as well, it makes it look like Rockville Center is not going down in actual dollar amounts in state aid, when in actuality, we are. So Mr. Bartels will touch upon this, and that will be a part of our budget presentations. We is still in good shape as we prepare our initial draft budget, and Mr. Bartels has done a great job anticipating that this might actually have happened. But the key thing that I want the public to be aware of is there's a provision in there called either save harmless or hold harmless. They're actually interchangeable. And what that does is, what that says is districts that have, say, received $10 million in state aid in 22-23 are held harmless. They won't get less than that in 23-24, meaning like you will get a baseline of 10 million, not less. In the governor's proposal right now, they're proposing to eliminate that, which would mean that it would be much harder for a school district to know from year to year what their state aid is going to be, and then also much harder for a school district to try to budget appropriately based on what their revenue is going to be. So I just wanted to let the public know that. I know that the Superintendent's NISCUS Association is vociferously against this. I also know that New York State School Boards is arguing against that as well. There was a quote from them in the newspaper as well. So please, for the public out there, please be aware that this is something that is not good for schools because it makes it 10 times more difficult on how to budget. So they've already constrained the tax levy, so they really should at least allow us the opportunity to meet with the revenue that we can anticipate from year to year, at least as a baseline. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. So, Madam President, that's my report for this evening, and then we'll turn into our presentations.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin. All right, turning to the public work session portion of tonight's meeting, tax levy calculation presentation. Mr. Gavin?
Well, as we know, Mr. Bartels has done an absolutely fantastic job putting together our budgets for years. So this is the first stage in our budget process, which Mr. Bartels will outline, and I'll ask Mr. Bartels to kick it off on how we calculate what our tax cap could be.
Thank you. So I think tonight we're going to talk a little bit about our financial health, where we stand this year, kind of going into the budget process, where I expect kind of the budget to be, and what the tax cap calculation looks like for this coming year. First, we'll talk about the budget schedule, kind of where we stand, and we'll update that as we go along, just so everybody knows where we stand leading up to the actual budget vote in May. I'll talk about our fund balance. We talked about that last year and using some of that, and I'll explain how that has impacted this year's fund balance. Our budget history, where we've been for the past 10 years, and what goes into the tax cap calculation, what it ends up being for us for this year. So we begin the budget process in the fall. October, November, December, we get input from all of the building administrators, directors, assistant superintendents. We put that budget together. We then go over it in December, early January with the superintendent. and we have our first presentation today. We are still finalizing. I'm very close to kind of balancing the budget. We have to match our revenues to our expenditures. We're getting very close to that point. One of the last things we needed was the state aid runs, so we'll be able to finalize that. We'll have more discussion in the next few meetings. I think we're going to focus on administration, benefits, and capital at our next meeting, February 15th. That we're going to be talking about the budget. Then we'll have curriculum and PPS on March 7th. And then finally, music, arts, and phys ed and athletics on March 21st. On April 16th, we have our preliminary budget hearing. That is the last chance we'll have to make any final changes to the budget. On May 7th, we have our formal budget hearing, which is a requirement from the state. It's just, that's our final budget. We can't make any changes to it at that time. And then we have our annual election and budget vote on May 21st. So I started this chart last year because we were talking about where we would be. We were talking about using some of our fund balance for capital projects last year. So this is the exact same chart as last year. The one bar we have for 22-23 it has changed slightly, and then 23-24 is a new bar projecting where we're going to be at the end of this year. But if I go to the 22-23 with the two circles, that top circle is where we had talked about last year, using $2.5 million of fund balance to apply towards the middle school projects, the middle school roof and the turf and field. You'll see there's a portion above that circle. That's where we actually ended the year. When I did this presentation at this point last year, the top of the circle is where we were projecting ending the year at that time. We were able to get some other savings for the rest of the year, so we actually ended up higher on fund balance than we thought. The lower circle shows that actual use of the $2.5 million from the reserves, so from our undesignated amount. So that's why the yellow portion is higher, and that green portion, which is our undesignated amount, is a little bit lower for 22-23. You'll also see where we expected to end up after this year, after using the $2.5 million, is kind of at the bottom of that top circle. So that was the projection. We were going to ending up using that much money, so the top of that blue bar would be at the bottom of that blue circle. So at the end of this year, that's where we expected that to be. So you can see that's even higher than we were saying. So we've already made up some of that money. So where we talked about we're going to use the $2.5 million, we were concerned how last year was going to end up, how this year is going to end up. We're still going to be in very good shape going forward. We'll finalize this year, and then maybe next year we can talk about other possibilities for, again, utilizing fund balance going forward to cover additional projects. Our budget history, this is our last 10 years. You can see the tax levy and the budgets kind of follow themselves up until last year, where we added the additional amount. The tax levy actually stayed kind of down a little bit, down around that 2% number, where the budget increase jumped, and that again is because we had to put in the capital projects, so that's why that last year's number jumped so high. For the same reason, this year's projected budget for next year is now going to be lower, so we expect that to be about 1.1%, but that's that capital money coming off of last year, so it'll be a much smaller increase. The tax levy itself will be a little higher than that. A lot of it, we'll talk about in a second, will depend on how much money we put in for capital projects. There's a formula that goes into that. So right now, we're looking at about 2.5% on the tax levy. This is our actual tax cap calculation, and just try to walk everybody through it. Everybody thinks of it as the 2% number when everybody hears about the 2% tax cap. it's 2% is one piece of it. It's kind of right in the middle of this calculation. But it's affected by other pieces. It's affected by pilot payments, and it's affected by capital projects and debt service. So we start with last year's levy. That number is then increased by something called a tax-based growth factor. What that is new construction in the district that has added properties to the tax rolls. Rockville Center, we're pretty much fully developed, so this doesn't impact us that much. This was a high number for us.
A little higher than most.
1.0051. We have been at 1.0001, 02, those numbers in prior years. So this was actually kind of a big number for us. And I'm not expecting that to continue in the future. I'm not sure exactly what that was. It probably had something to do with some of the apartment buildings that have come online and so forth. We then add the prior year pilots, which are taken off at the end for the new year. Pilots are payments in lieu of taxes. Those are payments we get usually from apartment buildings. We do have one from LIPA. They're payments that we get in lieu of getting it off the tax base. It's separate. It's additional revenue over and above the tax base, so the state considers that extra revenue that should not be included as part of the taxes, part of the calculation. So we add that back from where we were last year. We subtract prior year exemptions. That's all of the capital project monies that we have, less any state aid, building aid that we get. So that's a combination number in there. We then multiply that number by the growth factor. That's the 2% number for this year. Last year was 2%. This year it's 2%. Basically, it's based on inflation. So that number has been well above that, but it's capped at 2%. We then subtract the projected pilots, what we're expecting to get for next year. So you see that number goes up a little bit every year. Typically, we'll go up a little bit in our pilot payments because over a number of years, the pilots are supposed to grow and then up to a point where they would be placed onto the tax rolls, and then those particular properties would expect to pay that amount when they hit the tax rolls. We then add back our projected exemptions. Again, that's pretty much the similar number to last year. It's up just a little bit. And then that creates the new tax levy limit for next year. So that tax levy limit is now $106,495,000. It's a 2.52% increase over next year. I'm expecting to stay under that for next year at about 2.49. So we don't want to go over that tax cap. If we did, we would require a supermajority override. So we are not looking to do that. We want to stay under the cap. And that number is based on using $1.8 million in capital projects for next year. That's the number we have been using in prior years up until last year, where we added the extra $2.5 million. So we're back down to the number that had been in the budget in prior years for capital projects. That's where we stand.
Thank you, Mr. Bartels.
I did want to get into the state aid as
Yep.
Mr. Gavin related. So our projection for state aid for next year is down about 300,000, 300,000+. That's due to the change in foundation aid for the most part. Foundation aid, there was a slight change in the calculation, which I'm not sure I could explain at this point in time, but the governor proposed a change in the actual calculation. The other reason we're down is we've had a decline in enrollment. So for the most part, it's enrollment based. So that's why our number is down. As Mr. Gavin has stated, typically we have save harmless in these situations, so districts don't lose money that we had in the past and have to try to make that up. But that's a reduction in aid as opposed to what the papers had said. The reason we looked like we had an increase was because the state reset the universal pre-K amount. So we have a pre-K program in the district. We were allocated last year 1.1 million. We were only able to use about $500,000 for that. So the state reset what we're getting for this year back down to that $500,000. They're allocating us again another 1.1 million for that universal pre-K program. But if we can't use all of that money, we can't use that 500,000, and that 500,000 would be directed specifically for pre-K. We couldn't use it for anything else anyway. So that's why we're actually down about 300,000 right now in state aid. However, when we budgeted for this year, we always try to budget conservatively, not knowing things like this, what's going to happen if our expenditures don't, we have a number of expenditure-driven aids, BOCES, transportation aid. If we don't spend the money, we don't get as much in aid, and there's other changes that may be made during the year by the state. So we had budgeted for this year about 500,000 less than what we're actually expecting. So that number, we can increase up to that number for next year. So even though we're looking like we're having a reduction in the state aid, we'll be able to increase the allocation on the revenue side of the budget because it's still under where we're projected to be for next year.
And that's a credit to your foresight, so thank you very much. The board very much
We try to
appreciates
do
that.
that every year so we don't run into that situation, so,
Yeah.
and we still have some flexibility moving forward to, cover funding the budget, so thank you.
Thank you. So at the next meeting, it says the plan is to discuss capital. Yes?
Yes,
Okay.
February 15th.
February 15th.
February
Yes,
So
that's
during
that's
that
the next
meeting,
board
we'll
meeting.
have some sort of concrete idea of what we're thinking in terms of how we're going to be spending the 1.8.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, well, I'll go through building by building where we're expecting to spend that.
Okay. And the board has been touring the buildings, and we'll be prepared with our notes as well, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Any comments or questions from board members? Mr. Bartels?
Do you expect at all for this projection and formula to move? Or do you feel like this 2.52 is where we're gonna, where the tax cap
I think we're going to
percentage?
be pretty close to that number. It may change slightly if we find during our capital project discussions that there's something else that we want to add.
Oh, no, I know, where
So-
we come in is going to
Yeah.
be flexible, but in terms of that particular 2.52, not where we come in under it, but in terms of the max, that is, like this, like, I'm thinking about the exemptions and the pilots, like, there's a range. Will their movement up and down at all affect that 2.52, or this is?
The only way it would affect it is if we increase our capital line, that 1.8 million.
Okay.
If we make it $2 million, because we find some other projects that, after our discussions, we really want to get done. If we lower that number, that would then reduce that percentage. If we find, there are a number of projects in there, but you really don't want to get to that 2.5, you want to reduce the 1.8 million to 1.6 million.
Right.
That could change that as well. My recommendation would be to keep that 1.8 million in. We've had that. We have a number of issues within our buildings, which all the board members have seen, we've discussed over the years. We need to keep our buildings in a good state of repair. So I'm expecting that 2.5 to stay pretty much right where it is.
Yeah, absolutely, in terms of maintenance. And just a clarification on the UPK, the universal pre-K, the money is still available if we are able to
Correct. Yeah.
service and use it in district.
Yes, that UPK money it's a specific amount per student. I think it's $5,400 per student. It comes with certain restrictions, so you have to run a specific program with a specific number of students for a specific amount of time during the school day. So for either us to do it, we have space issues, so we've done a request for proposals. We have the JCC doing it right now. They have been able to take more students, but we have not been able to get more students enrolling in the program, a lot of them, because it is in Oceanside. Many students like to stay here in Rockville Center. We have asked our other programs here in the Rockville Center if they could do it for that amount of money, and they have not been able to do that. That's why we're having the JCC do it, just to provide that opportunity for the students who want to take advantage of it.
Thanks.
And I think it's important to note, as these discussions continue, we'll continue to make sure the community is updated with the latest information regarding the PK.
Some of this is covered in the
Yes.
survey that we're going to talk about in terms of options. Some of this is, we're applying for an increased budget for pre-K, meaning like they have another grant that they just made available. We're doing that proposal as well to see if we can get a difference between $5,400 and $10,000 per student, which might give us different options, both in district or out of district. So we have no definitive answer on that, but Dr. Moriarty's been working on that proposal. She's been working with the state on that, and that's something where the deadline for submitting it is the 24th, Dr. Moriarty, 24th. And so after, we'll have submitted that probably this week, if not tomorrow. So we'll have some more information on that, but that'll be included in the next presentation.
Anything else for Mr. Bartels?
I didn't have a budget per se question, just more of a question from a comment that was made about enrollment being down. That's, I know you mentioned pre-K enrollment. Do we have larger decreases in enrollment, like K through 12? Could you expand on that? I'm just curious what.
Well, I think some of the enrollment, we had a large drop-off from 8th to 9th this year, larger than anticipated. Usually we get from 20 to 30. We had a little bit more than that this year, some of whom have already returned, but we did start off the year a little bit lower. So for example, the high school started at about 975, and now we're back up to about 1,000 in the high school. So we have seen some fluctuations in enrollment as well. At the elementary levels, Riverside had a few less sections this year. Next year, it looks like we might have to add another one. So from year to year, and next year's kindergarten does look smaller than we've seen in the past. So we talked about like the COVID baby boom. The COVID baby boom is like a year or two away. Our live births, if I remember correctly, is not next year's kindergarten, it's 2 years from now. So we are anticipating, you can tell this better than I can with 25 years in the district, but it's the highest live births that we've had in district and in village in a while.
And for the entering kindergarten, the live births for this group of students is actually one of the lowest that we've had. So it actually had been coming down, but for the next couple of years that we have the data for, the 2020 births, the 2021 births, those numbers have jumped up.
So the enrollment seems slightly down at the elementary level and then down at the high school.
More, yeah. The middle school seems to be pretty stable right now, within about 15, 20 kids for over 3 grades. Elementary is somewhat down. I wouldn't say it's dramatically down, and it's down in different places. So you may have 3 sections at Hewitt that might be 75. You may have 3 sections somewhere else that might be only 68. So it kind of depends on placement and where people are. Wilson had a bubble go through of 4 sections and grade levels. That seems to have stabled out. Covert also seemed to have a bubble for a little bit. That seems to have stabled out. And Watson's been pretty solid all the way through. So it looks like right now, I can't speak, it's still very early with kindergarten, but it looks like we have maybe one more section at Riverside for next year, and everything else seems to be about status quo.
So as that process unfolds as well, we'll continue to update the board and the
Yep.
public in our next few meetings about the enrollment trends and
Yes, ma'am.
as we schedule. Thank you. Good. Okay, Mr. Gavin, next presentation, instructional programming updates.
Thank you. Excuse
Oh, no,
me.
sorry, survey response update.
Survey responses first. Watch your back, guy.
Sorry.
Well, good evening, everyone. I just wanted to go over some of the survey results that we started this year. This year, we did a survey of our teachers and our parents about what they thought were important values, outcomes, and student experiences here in the district. We did this survey in the hopes of gathering useful information to help us plan the future. So I wanted to go over the survey results with you tonight. So who did the survey? We had 936 different unique responses. The vast majority of the responses were from parents. We did have about 15% of the responses from employees, and we also had some community members with no school-age children also give a response. So we tried to send that out to as many people as possible. In terms of, is this a robust response or not a robust response? Last year, for our climate survey, we had about, a little bit over 1,000. So we're close, we're a little bit off from our climate survey. And that, of course, is not including the students from the climate survey from last year. So where are we coming from? For parents, you can see that we have roughly representation along the lines of the buildings that you would kind of expect it, although the middle school actually outpaced the high school. You can also see that we did have our pre-K parents voice as well. So we had about 5% of our survey responses have students at the JCC in Oceanside. So for our employees, you can see that it's a little bit more scattered in terms of the representation, where our high school actually was, which you would expect would be the largest representation. We also asked if you are a community member, where do you live? So like, where is your zone of attendance? You had a large representation, Wilson had a large representation. So the first thing we'll talk about a little bit are values. So we asked all of the survey respondents to kind of list and rank their top 5 values that they want the school district to embody or help imbue in our students. So the number one, meaning every single person gave it at least a rank of 5. The number 1 value here in Rockville Center is excellence. The number 2 value, responsibility. Number 3 value, these are our top respondents all in, is integrity. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the values, and then I'm going to try to provide a little bit of analysis and clustering about how we can take these values and move forward. So if you look here, we talked about lifelong learning. Here we have a number of values that are somewhat overlapping, but we also have them very close in terms of the response. Lifelong learning, empathy, respect, and independence. Again, still very close to how we rank things. We have inclusivity, creativity, perseverance, and leadership. Collaboration and adaptability and diversity are also, these are our rankings for those. Citizenship, open-mindedness, and service. These right now, in the way they are written, seem to be something that was not as important to the survey respondents. So how can we cluster this and try to make sense of it? Well, it's clear if you look at excellence and responsibility that we have a culture of high achievement. We're looking to reinforce a culture of high achievement. It's important to our stakeholders and to the people in our survey respondents that excellence and responsibility is really, really important. Second, if you try to cluster a few things together, integrity and lifelong learning, we want our students to be honest and reflective because it leads to lifelong personal development. Empathy, respect, inclusivity, and diversity. We also want compassionate, if we take a look at all this encompassing, we want a compassionate community of learners that values the dignity of all members. And we have independence, creativity, perseverance, and adaptability. We want our students to have the confidence to try new things, to make mistakes, overcome adversity, and approach problem solving in different ways. So I tried to cluster it a little bit so that we weren't just focused on one individual thing, so that we could try to see a cluster of skills. The next component of the survey was how do you rate overall the quality of information you receive to the district? As the board knows, one of the things that we focused on this year was strategic communication, so we wanted to hear from survey respondents. How are we doing? And overall, we had about 29% said it was excellent, 56% good, 13% fair, and 1% said the communication from the district was poor. What does that translate to? So one of the next questions we had was, how should we reach you best? You know, what are the modes of communication that you find useful? So 100% again, when you rank them on top, email me, text me, I'll go to a meeting, I'll look at the website. Automated phone calls are starting to get annoying, but some people still like them, especially if it's a snow day, might I remind you. Social media, some of us will look at it, some of us won't. District app, I'm not really interested in that. Board meeting recaps, district online newsletter, short news and informational videos, superintendent roundtable discussions, and very few people, at least at this point, want a podcast, which they haven't heard us do one yet, but maybe we should and see if we can change that number. The next section of the survey, we asked our respondents to rate the quality of, this goes back to the capital, this goes back to what Mr. Bartels was talking about, rate the quality of our district building and facilities. So overall, 18% of our respondents said we have excellent facilities, 58% said they're good, 20% said they're fair, 3% said, you know what, I don't feel comfortable giving you a comprehensive rating. Now, it is important to note that we have a 100-year-old middle school, a 100-year-old Riverside school, and Hewitt is moving rapidly towards 100 years old. So we do have some older facilities in terms of the actual physical plant, which again goes to the next question, how are we maintaining our physical plants? So when you rate the maintenance of our district building and facilities, 32% say they do an excellent job, and this goes out to our grounds. Our grounds crew have done a really nice job. Our head custodians and our custodians do a great job inside the buildings, trying to keep things clean, trying to make sure that the things that we can fix on a day-to-day basis are fixed. So kudos to them. 11% said we do a fair job at maintaining things, and 5% said, you know what, I don't feel comfortable rating this. We asked too, because this year, for the first time, we have a new security director. And we wanted to talk, we had an in-depth conversation last year about security, and we wanted to say, well, tell us a little bit more about the security. 28% said excellent, 48% said good, 20% said fair, and 5% said unable to rate. Now, to be fair to Mr. Mitten, we gave the survey about 4 weeks into his tenure. So we've already seen some positive steps that he's done, and I wouldn't want anyone to think that we were asking him to be rated after about 48 days in the job. The other component that we asked our respondents to talk about was, what are the skills we need to be teaching our students for the future? What are the important skills? What do our respondents think are important skills that we should reinforce here in the school district? Number 1 was communication skills, writing, listening, and speaking. Number 2, critical thinking skills. Number 3, problem-solving skills. And you could see a range of respondents, including interpersonal skills and self-advocacy. Surprisingly, some of the lower skills that were rated, at least in this survey, were reading comprehension and research skills. I thought that was actually a surprising bit of data. But when you try to cluster things together again and say, how can we look at this more holistically, because people might have different interpretations about what that skill might mean, or in the context of 10 skills, I think this is important, but I also kind of think this is important as well. What I tried to do was take a look at clusters of skills and try to group those together and see where they fall in terms of in terms of their response. Communication skills, that's still your number 1 response when you talk all in. Reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Critical and analytical skills. Critical thinking, problem solving, research skills. That would be like a number 2 cluster. Number 3 cluster, social and cultural skills. So interpersonal skills, self-advocacy, leadership, fine and performing arts knowledge, fluency in a second language, social and interpersonal skills, and then the core academic skills of like reading and math fluency. If we take a look at that, we know as a school district we want to try to do all of these things, but it was important to try to put together and listen to our community, because again, part of communication is not just telling people, it's really listening to people, and that's what this survey is all about. The other thing the next piece that we wanted to take a look at was, what are the top 5 issues in terms of what our parents and adults think are facing our students today? So I know that when I took this, the first thing I thought of was social media. So when we looked at this, I pretty much figured out that the word social media probably made everyone say, that's definitely a problem. So the number 1 overall problems that our stakeholders feel that students face today is negative peer pressure, which includes both in-person reactions and interactions and social media. Second, a very close second, academic-related stress and anxiety. Third, bullying. Fourth, time management. As I'm sure Dr. Walsh can attest to, he's here in the audience tonight, but as I'm sure he can attest to, our kids are really busy. So time management, how do we manage going to a sport, being in a play, being in a concert, and still handling all of our academic work? Health and wellness, financial concerns such as paying for college, excessive student workload, and substance abuse. I am not surprised that social media would be something that has received a really high rating here. I would also not be surprised, academic-related stress and anxiety. But again, this is what the parents and the teachers feel right now. I think it's going to be important. We'll talk about this in a minute. I think it's important that we also, get the students' perspective in one way, shape, or form. The other piece that we asked about were navigating the college admission process, a lower response, higher education requirements for post-secondary jobs or careers, or fewer high-paying jobs after high school. These were not as prevalent in terms of the top 5 issues facing our students today in terms of the survey response. This is also very interesting now that we are entering budget season. What should be the top 5 financial priorities of the district? Rank number 1 is the top priority, and then rank down. Over a clear choice from our survey respondents is that we are looking to maintain equitable class sizes for teaching and learning. That is the number 1 response. Second, secure, clean, modern facilities and buildings. Third, enhancing and upgrading instructional technology. Fourth, and these are very close, these few. Fourth, interventions and supports for struggling students. Career and technical offerings. Funding for music, fine arts, or sports and facilities upgrades. Acquisition of property. So we asked, should we buy property? Should this be one of our things? 47% said maybe. Preparing budgets that adhere to the New York State property cap is 27%, and upgrading our libraries and media was the lowest piece in terms of what should our financial priorities be. The next piece, which I alluded to before, and which Mr. Bartel's already started discussing, was pre-K. So we asked, how important do you feel is it for the district to identify additional spaces to offer pre-K to our families? 42% of our respondents said it's very important. 26% of our respondents said it's important. 19% somewhat important. 13% not important at all. Now that could be a range. That could be a faculty member who says, I'm a high school teacher, I don't necessarily think pre-K is important. It could be a parent of somebody who's graduated or doesn't have kids in the district. So the next question actually tapers that down. For the people that do feel it's important or very important, what are you looking for? So the next question will show you, it's not the full 930, it reduces in terms of the N. So it drops down to 796, and we gave them, if it is important to you, how should the district think about doing it? So number 1, identify additional space or pre-K providers located in Rockville Center to provide additional seats for students. 100% of those 796 people ranked that at one of the top 4. Number 2, build additional classroom spaces on current elementary schools in order to provide pre-K students the opportunity to attend their home school for pre-K. That was also popular, not as popular as the other option in terms of identifying different spaces. 3, expand our current UPK program at its current location, the Oceanside JCC, to offer additional space and seats for students. And then, are you okay with it as the status quo, about 56%? So, that gives us kind of a baseline. It's a smaller baseline. It's not necessarily representative of the entire community, but it does give us a little bit of ways to look at how we should be looking at pre-K. As Mr. Bartels has already said, in our current configuration for pre-K where we use Oceanside, we do not have the ability to access all of the state funds, which we have advocated for the ability to say, can we use it for rent? Can we use that additional money for rent somewhere? Can we use that to build? None of which at this point is allowable under the grant as it exists. So we will be bringing that up to our legislators when we have our legislator meeting going into in the spring. But one of the things that we know we want is to offer people something in town. So that's something that we have to consider and we have to look at going forward. We also have to consider how does that play into the budget. So building on every elementary school so that you can have UPK at every building has a much greater cost, and I would caution the board at this point that until we put numbers to certain options, that we take this as an indication but not necessarily an affirmation of this is what everybody wants. The other component that we had here in the survey was, how should we measure our success? What are the things that are important to our parents? What are the things that are important to our community members in terms of how do we rate the things that we do? How should we measure our success? Number 1, Academic growth for both individual students and cohorts of students year over year. That was 78% of our respondents said that's very important. Advanced Regents diploma rate, 28%. Attendance at parent-teacher conferences, 17%. The breadth and depth of course offerings and learning opportunities, meaning do we have a robust program for kids and choices for kids? That'll lead into the next presentation that we have shortly right after this. We also had, should we look at our climate survey results? Should we be asking people what they think, and should we use that as a benchmark? Our college and vocational placement was also important. The number of students taking and earning college credits through dual enrollment courses. College readiness indicators, 46%, SAT and ACT. Graduation rate, 51%. IB or AP exam scores, 33%. Participation of students in higher level classes as a percent of cohort. What that basically means is, do our kids move in and tackle high level classes? And if so, what is the overall percentage of the cohort? So I can give you an example that Dr. Walsh shared in his presentation when he did his data presentation. 80% of our students, our senior cohort, takes a higher level math class, a college level math class. So that would be something that along that lines. The other piece that we had was what was engagement. So I thought it would be helpful to also kind of cluster the way that we look at all of our indicators as well. So I'll do that in a second. But these are some of the other components. Postgraduate achievement and performance as measured by guidance and alumni surveys. Reading and math proficiency was high. Regent scores not as high. Staff attendance was not as important. Staff retention rate was somewhat important. Staff attendance and student participation rate in extracurriculars such as clubs, performing arts, and athletics. How can we take that? Well, let's take a look. Interestingly, although the value of community service was low, measuring the respondents did point out that community service and volunteering was also important. So sometimes it might be the context in which the question was asked. It might be the range of options offered to parents that sometimes, occasionally, from time to time, offer us different perspectives on the same issue. But I did think it would be helpful to kind of group the performance measures together. Number one, the most important thing, what you would expect in schools, is if you take a look at our academic performance measures and add up all the scores, that is the most important. So academic growth, test results, proficiency levels, advanced Regents diploma rate, percent of cohort taking higher level classes, those are academic measures. Post-secondary outcomes would be second in terms of performance, which is college and vocational placements. Third, engagement and participation measures, which would be extracurricular participation, parent-teacher conference participation rates. And then third, which would be less important to our stakeholders, which would still be important to us, which is institutional health measures, like what is our climate survey, what does it say about the work we're doing, how can we use that to drive the work that we're doing and get better, because we always want to be in a place of continuous improvement. Are our students coming to school? Are we able to keep that level at a very high level, which we are? And are we retaining our staff? So does that show that people want to be here and work here and it's a good place to work? So those are kind of the clusters in terms of the rankings of importance for our accountability measures. So all of that information impact into next steps. What are some next steps? So we talked about the idea, since this particular survey didn't necessarily have the voices of the students, one of the options that we've extended to the Board of Education or representatives of the Board of Education would be to have a focus group of our seniors, people that have gone through, our students that have gone through all of our classes, all of our years, to gather their perspective on the survey data. So in that case, we'd show the students what some of the surveys were and take their perspectives, and then we'd have the opportunity to learn from their perspective as well. As Mr. Bartels alluded to, we still want to examine our capital work proposals, are at $1.8 million right now that we have in the budget. Do those proposals align with the feedback that we've gotten in this survey? Should we have a different priority? I think that's one of the lenses that we're going to look at. We should explore options to offer pre-K in town. What would those options potentially be? Is it financially feasible? Do we have a partner? Do we not have a partner? That will be one of the things that we'd have to talk about. We should also examine the current systems that we have that measure student growth and make sure that we're always incorporating that kind of growth reporting systems into our public presentations. So there might be, so for example, NWEA is something that would be taking as measuring student growth. Are there other pieces out there that we should be incorporating into our presentation for data? And then the other component I thought was very interesting in terms of our communication was we should be examining a new website and parent communication system. So we know that email is important, we know that texting is important, we know that somewhat app is important, but we know that they go to the we know that our parents go to the website for information. So we want to make sure that we have the systems put in place that would do all of those things robustly and, most importantly, in a unified way. So right now, our school messenger does a piece, we have our website, we send some stuff out, but we have other systems of communication that we may not need if we have a unified system. So those would be some of the next steps that we have, and I'd be happy to take any questions from the board at this time on this presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin. Starting at the end there, that was my first question and point, but you addressed it with the communication system. So thank you, because the board has expressed the desire to explore some new communication system, just in terms of even the way it gets sent out, depending on the user. Currently, you might have to download an attachment, there's extra steps in the process, so especially if it's important information that we want to get to our community members and our parents in an expedient manner. So I'm glad to hear that we're exploring that, and I look forward to that report back to the board once you are ready to make a recommendation. It's important to note that we as a board had the results as well of the survey. Each member of the board took time to really go through every single comment, every single result, and we discussed it as a group at our board retreat earlier this week. So we would like to thank everyone that took the time to complete the survey, and we look forward to the opportunity to get the student insights as well. Thank you. Any comments or questions from board members?
You want to start?
No, I said go ahead.
First of all, thank you for doing this and for the survey last year, and I know we're planning another one in the spring. I think it's invaluable that parents have the opportunity, even if it's not the, participation rate maybe you were expecting or hoping for, like, the option is there, so I think that's really important that we continue that. I also really like that we're gonna talk to the students. I think it was interesting to me, a lot of this is the parent perspective, obviously, but particularly the parent perspective on what stresses, what issues are facing students. I'd be curious to see if what their parents think aligns, So for that reason and others, I think it's really important to get their feedback. It's just dawning on me now. I'm wondering if it's worth doing some kind of teacher focus group or some opportunity for staff members to comment on, even if they didn't fill out the survey, just like what the results are showing and maybe what their impressions are, and if the two things align, and if they have any ideas about anything. Because I think they too have a perspective that none of the rest of us have. Obviously, they're doing it day to day. And then just generally, I thought one other interesting thing is how we're gonna manage what things that seem potentially like conflicted values, right? Like everyone wants excellence, that's a clear message, but parents are seriously worried about student anxiety and academic related stress. So that's a really fine line to walk, right, as a school district. So I just think as we're looking at everything we're doing, that like keeping those sometimes conflicting things in mind and trying to balance that. Now my only other comment is for the communication piece, because it is a board goal this year, I'm wondering if there's a way to just get a little bit more feedback, maybe even in the spring survey, about like what specifically is lacking, or where parents are finding because overall they're saying the communication is good, but we don't really have a very clear idea of maybe what could be better versus what we're doing well. So I'd be interested to try to hash that out a little bit if we can somehow.
Sure. Your point is well taken, that sometimes a virtue can become a vice, meaning like the things that we hold in terms of excellence as a value can also lead to something that is negatively affecting our students as well. So I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that just because this was the number one thing, that this is the only thing we're going to focus on. That's why I thought it would be important to cluster things together and to provide a little bit more context about how people could have responded and what they might have meant, and try to provide an interpretive lens to that. But we are definitely aware of the fact that excellence is something that's important, at least the term excellence is something that's important to the community. But we also recognize the fact that sometimes in that push to be excellent, there could be stress that's involved in there as well. So that's some of the other reasons why we put some things into place, like our sources of strength, the social emotional learning. There was challenge day today at the middle school, just to try to provide that additional support as well. So I also do like the idea of trying to figure out what's missing in terms of communication. So we will work on that. I don't know exactly the questions right now in my head about how I would capture that, but it's something, Dr. M, that we need to think about in our climate survey coming up in the spring. So that's a normal survey that is out of the box, shall we say, but we are allowed to add like a section or something of things that are uniquely Rockville Center. So we can try to come up with some questions that make sense for that.
Thank you.
We talked a little bit about the climate survey. I just want to stay on that for 1 second. You're saying that, yes, they are like kind of maybe more cookie cutter questions, but to Janet's point, I feel that we need to mirror a lot of the student, information that we're taking from them to this, because we will only then end up with one side of a question. And if a family has an interpretation of something, there's a lot of times we see things on the outside of the schools as one way, and the students will say, no, my principal explained that, my teacher explained that, oh, okay, and they're educating us at home. So that kind of brought up for me the whole, how, when we're surveying parents, there's a responsibility on our part too in terms of education. So to your point about Mr. Mitten and him just joining, we talk so much at length about security as an example. What this tells me is that we also need to do a good job making sure that we're educating our community as to what we do have in place. So that they feel good about where their students are going to school, but that's partly on us. If we see something in this survey, I'm using security as an example just because you highlighted it, but it's not necessarily just how can we make security better, but it's also if we feel we've done a lot, how can we make sure our community knows what we've done? And how can we make sure that they feel good, again, about where their students are at school? So it's an education from us out. But then again, on the other side of the education coin this is informing us of so many things, of more lessons we need to give. So Mrs. Love and I were talking earlier about our mental health and wellness committee. It's telling us what the parents are looking for in terms of help and assistance for their students. So where they might rate bullying as a higher thing, we'll see what the students say, hopefully when we mirror that, but if the parents are concerned about negative peer pressure or social media or bullying, that's helping to inform us what our next parent university topics could be, or a wellness committee things should be. So I think that we could use this data in such important ways back and forth. And we talked about this on Tuesday, the board meeting recap portion I think is so important, because so many things for the people that do attend or watch or hear, we know so many more things and we're having so many more conversations that maybe people are missing. So when we do talk about these new courses and now they become available to people and things like that, we want to make sure that our community is really understanding what we are presenting, what these meetings are for. So I do like the idea of us utilizing our new board doc system or however we do it to make sure that our community is being pushed out to in terms of education. So those were the overarching things that came out to me from everything we read in the survey.
Your point is well taken about providing that. In terms of communication, what you're pointing out is that some of these survey results are indicating what the other issue is, what are we missing in terms of our communication. So there is some information that we can use here from the survey to help us improve communications. The other component that I do want to remember myself is that there's a component in the climate survey that our students answer that specifically talk about bullying and talks about peer pressure. So we will be able to get not just a focus group in terms of students, but we'll be able to get a much larger sample in terms of student response later on in the spring. So when we get that information back, which is usually sometimes either late in June, and we can have a conversation about that, that usually can impact how we look as we're talking about next year's goals as well. I think it's well timed to have that conversation, but it'll be another data point for us to have to say, did we change from the last climate survey, and do the parents' perspectives from the value survey kind of line up with that? So your point is extremely well taken.
And thank you. I thought it was great, and I echo Mrs. Barry. Thank you to everybody who participated. It really is very helpful to us, and I think will help kind of shape our future. So thank you.
I don't have any specific questions, just echoing the thank you for taking the time to fill out the survey. Thank you for taking the time to analyze it and, putting together a forum where we could really dive into the results. I think the more data that we can have, the better informed we'll be and the better we can do for our students and our families.
Yeah, agreed. I really have the same comment, and I think that it is well-timed in terms of looking at our financial priorities as we begin to develop a budget for the next academic year. And parents and families are telling us loud and clear, maintaining equitable class sizes, secure, clean, modern facilities, buildings, enhancing and upgrading instructional technology, interventions and support for students. We are all on the same page. These are all of the concerns that we talk about all the time: academic excellence, academic growth. We share your concerns, and I appreciate the opportunity for our parents and families to help us identify these singular concerns, and agreed that the drilling down into the details in terms of what communications will be the most well-received, and what skills, as they continue to evolve, as our students go through our K-12 buildings and move on to the next stage of their lives, what skills have we made sure that they take with them? And these questions and these conversations that we have with our parents and families, as much as these are survey results, they're the end of one process, but they're really part of a continuous process. It's not something that we do once. We consider all these things all of the time. And so are you comfortable with the cycle that we're in now in terms of surveying parents and families?
I am, because I think it informs our process as a board and a superintendent in terms of establishing goals and establishing processes for curriculum review, for capital projects, all of the things that we have to consider on a year-to-year basis. We should be considering the community's feedback at the same time. So how does the community's feedback drive that process? So the in-depth conversation that we had about survey results during the retreat was time extraordinarily well spent, because we had the opportunity to digest it, to hear each other's perspectives, and then think widely about how is that going to impact our leadership and our vision going forward. So to me, it's always super important to listen. It's always, and it could be survey if it's wide, it could be conversations, it could be focus groups, whatever the medium is, but I find that it's so helpful to learn. I mean, just going back to the focus group that we had with our 6th grade students at the middle school. They told us 3 or 4 different concrete things that are going to make our orientation process better, just by listening and feeding them pizza. That was it. The other thing that, we also did the same thing, Dr. Walsh and I did that up here at the high school with our 9th grade. What are things that we could do differently to make sure that our 9th graders coming from 8th grade have a clear, assimilated process? So that listening piece has driven improvement. I think it's also driven a good process, and I think we have the systems in place in terms of goals, in terms of reporting transparently on those goals to the board and to the public. I think those systems are in place, and I think that we're well positioned for this. Now, we probably won't do another value survey again, but we will continue to do, and I think it's extraordinarily important to do that climate survey yearly, because then we're going to have a benchmark from year to year. Are we seeing improvement in certain areas? Has a different area that was not a weakness before, is it a weakness now? If so, why does that perception exist? And I think it's also important to put out that these are people's perceptions. And sometimes they're extraordinarily well-informed, and sometimes they're not. And sometimes, but they're still valid. And we still have to talk about them, we still have to think about them. So I think in terms of the context of communication and our board goal about strategic communication, this is a key piece to that.
Right, I agree, and I think incorporating those sort of reporting systems and including this as one of our measures of, are we moving towards our goals? Are we achieving what we think we are? Because we are in constant conversation with our parents and families. And to know that, I hope that parents and families who are listening understand that it is so important to us to hear from you. We are listening, we want and need your opinions, and we do take them very seriously, and it's our charge to make them actionable.
And to follow up, the building principles, when we do the climate survey, we also do specific things to each building. So not only do we get the global perspective, but we get a building-by-building perspective that we work with. The building principals take a look at that data, they talk about it with their teams, and they talk about what are the things that we can get better at, what are the things that are really strong that we should leverage. So with climate, we do that not only on the district-wide level, we also do it, on a building-by-building basis.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. So one of the aspects that is addressed in the survey that we just went over, instructional programming, will be addressed now, and your thoughts for next year in terms of what that will look like.
I am about to
Next
switch the
presentation?
presentation right now. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, on the heels of our value survey and our outcome survey, what are the things that we're planning next year, and what are the things that we use to come up with new ideas? So I want to talk a little bit about that. What are the factors that we consider when we're considering new courses? Number one, and at the heart of everything, is our student perspective and student experience. So what are the student experiences we want? What are our students' perspective on those experiences? We also consider our mission statement. Are we living up to our mission? We also consider, skills exemplified by either the IB learner profile, the habits of mind. Also equally crucial is budget impact. So if we make a new course, what would be potential impact on the budget? We talk about, are the courses or course offerings or curriculum writing that we're doing, are all of those things aligned to good post-secondary implications? So is this a course at the high school that will lead to something outside and maybe a potential area of study in college? And then we also have to talk about, in this process, are our faculty prepared to teach it? Is the faculty prepared to teach? So these are all some of the factors that we consider. So how does this happen? The idea is proposed by either an administrator, a student, or a faculty member. The building principal will come and talk with central office, and we will say, is it feasible for this course development? What teacher training is needed, and we'll talk about all of that in a context. And then we will present, like we're doing tonight, the course offerings to the board for approval. I do want to note that this year we are doing it earlier so that we make sure that we are right in time, if things are approved, that our high school, our middle school can include these in parent communications as they begin to start scheduling for next year. So last year we were about 3 weeks later and didn't jive well with the process, so we're trying to make sure that we're doing this in a context so that Dr. Walsh can send out everything in one package, and we can make sure that we have strategic communication about this to our parents and to our students. All of our new courses, we're looking to increase, again, this comes from student responses from our climate survey from last year. We want to make sure that we have increased relevance. Our parents were asking for elevated rigor, and we want to make sure that we expand our opportunities for students. So, proposals for Southside High School for next year. We are looking to, last year we added ELA 11 as a standalone class. We are adding ELA 12 next year, as well as the next natural continuation. We are proposing adding a new IB course next year. It would be an SL course, Digital Society. I have to tell you, if you've read any of the curriculum for this, I want to teach this class. It might be the coolest class I've seen. And this was actually proposed by a teacher who came to Dr. Walsh and I and basically said, this is the coolest class I've ever seen, can we do this? So we're super excited about that class as another offering. And that is a group 3 class, I believe, so students can take that in group 3. One of the things that we're adding for next year, we noticed that when we have students that are entering the district new in 9th grade, or may not have passed Spanish in middle school, that we, in previous years, put them right into Spanish 3. So one of the things we want to do is have a combined year course over 1 year that would incorporate the content for Spanish 1 and Spanish 2 to fill that gap so that anyone that comes in would have the opportunity to take those classes on an appropriate level and still progress in language. Also at the high school, also proposed from teachers, 2 different courses. Number 1, Unified Art. I'm not sure how this started, but we have a wonderful class, Unified PE, where our students from core also interact with students, general education students, in the gym setting. The students that enroll in that class know specifically that and want to work with the core students in that setting. So we are also proposing doing this in the art setting as well. So we're super excited about this. This was proposed not only by one of our core teachers, but one of our art teachers. So we're going to offer that for next year. Our art exploration class. Right now we have a portfolio class that doesn't provide enough direct instruction for students that are really interested in learning more fine technique, especially our higher level art students. So we wanted to replace the portfolio class with the exploration class that will allow for a little bit more direct one-to-one instruction, say on specific techniques in painting or drawing, but still allow our students the opportunity to pursue their art and to develop their portfolio. Number 3, we're adding a personal finance class. As we alluded to in previous meetings, New York State has given out a new blueprint for how proposals for how high school can change. One of the areas of emphasis is personal finance, allowing our students the opportunity to take courses that recognize or teach banking, personal banking, finance, credit, all of the different components of personal finance. That will be an elective as well for next year at the high school. We have some new technology offerings next year, building on what we talked about last year. Last year we added AP Computer Science Principles. The next sequence in that is AP Computer Science, where they teach the programming language Java. We also recognize that we need to teach another programming language that is also extraordinarily important in pretty much any field. My daughter's in a master's degree, and she's taking this class as well, Python. So Python is one of the programming languages that is used to really manipulate large data sets. So we want to offer our students the opportunity to get an intro to Python programming. And then we've also talked a little bit about the advent of artificial intelligence and the advent of ChatGPT. And one of the new courses that we have next year is a really exciting field called prompt engineering. And what prompt engineering talks about is the ability to learn to structure questions and prompts for artificial intelligence to yield the best possible results. So how do you use the powerful tool to gain the insights that you want to gain? So that could be for research, that could be for a number of different things. I also happen to know that many colleges right now are offering new courses in prompt engineering, and this is a field that I read it in Business Week probably 2 months ago. You can make up to $250,000 doing this. Now, are our kids going to come right off the bat making $250,000? No, but it is one of those fields that's emerging. So we want to make sure that our students get a chance to manipulate the powerful tool, understand what it could be used for and what it shouldn't be used for, also very important, and then learn how to add value on top of it. So not only do we learn how to use the tool, but we learn how to do something and add value on top. Next year is also our second year of our planned rollout for Theory of Knowledge. As the board knows, in addition to Digital Society, Theory of Knowledge is my favorite class I've ever seen. So last year I was in the Theory of Knowledge class probably 9 times with 3 different teachers. And I was blown away by the level of thinking, by the whole construct of the class, and recognize that it should be important for everyone. So last year we changed the way we implemented it from 1 year in senior year to this year we implemented over 11th grade and 12th grade. That was the first year that we're doing that. Next year we're going to have a 1-year TOK for open enrollment, so not just diploma candidates. So that means if a student is just a course candidate or a student wants to take the class, they'll have the ability to do that. And then next year for our 2-year TOK for diploma candidates, which will be our second year, we're integrating some of the essential elements along with the TOK curriculum. This year, we experimented with the TOK curriculum. We know we're evolving in this particular case, so we want to make sure that the point of two-year TOK is this. You learn the knowledge and knower units so that as you go through as an 11th grader, the other IB classes, you can make those connections much more quickly and more robustly. So we want to make sure that we're having those components in TOK, the first year of TOK, as juniors, so that they are ready to go. Now, our TOK teachers are excited about this, number one, because it allows them to talk about TOK more. They love that. But number two, they also recognize that we're going to try to build in some time to work on the extended essay so that we teach our students the organization components that is necessary for a large project like a 6,000 or a 10,000 word essay. So we wanted to talk about, we've talked about this with the TOK teachers. We're excited for that year 2 implementation for next year. And that is our new, those are our new course offerings for the high school. At the middle school, not as many new ones, but we do have some important shifts. Currently, in our current proposal, no 6th grader gets an experience with art. So next year we want to change that. We have an exploratory class that our students take in 6th grade that is predominantly filled with the Family and Consumer Science mandate from New York State in terms of family and consumer science. This year, we're going to put in a 10-week art rotation into that piece as well. It still allows us to meet the Family and Consumer Science mandate, but it also allows all of our students the opportunity to experience art in 6th grade. In 7th grade, that also predicated us making a few changes in 7th grade in terms of the exploratory rotation. The 7th grade is going to focus on careers. The entrepreneurship used to be in 6th grade, now it's in 7th grade, and money management. So those that we felt are a little bit more linked together, and it would offer our 7th grade students the opportunity to have these experiences in exploratory. In 8th grade, we wanted to take one of the components that was in the 7th grade exploratory, digital photography and video, and move it to an elective. So currently 200 students have taken digital photography and video in 7th grade. If they're interested in it next year, they can take it as an elective. The other component that we're also super excited about building on both TOK, Digital Society, and Artificial Intelligence is in 8th grade next year, we are going to have a class called Inquiry in the AI Age. Meaning, how do we ask the big questions? How do we utilize powerful tools to uncover different types of research skills and to reinforce different types of research skills? We have two 8th grade social studies teachers that are diligently working on this course and couldn't be more excited. And we've also had the opportunity for those teachers to meet with our TOK teachers so that we can have some of those cross-cutting kind of concepts back and forth between both sections. Turning to the elementary, this year, we started our knowledge-based units in grades 3 to 5. We will continue that work for next year. And then we look forward to our math committee recommendations at the end of the year. That presentation is set for June. As the board knows, we go through a spotlight year for each one of the core components, core subject areas, where for an entire year we spend time looking at that particular subject, K-12, and then we make recommendations. What does this translate to and for our parents and for our students? How should we go about accessing some of these new courses? What is the process that we can do to move forward? Well, number one, what steps do I have to take to determine the right option for my child? So, as I said before, we've moved this presentation somewhat 3 weeks earlier this year so that we make sure that we have enough lead time for all of our parents to understand the new courses that we have, to make informed decisions, and to make sure that they have the opportunity to talk to their child's guidance counselor. So number one, if there's any course that you are interested in, if there are any courses that you have more questions about, contact your child's guidance counselor. If there's a course, say for example, last year for the first time we rolled out Math 8 and Science 8. If you had a question about whether or not this was right for your child, we encourage you to contact the guidance counselor, talk to your child's math teacher, have a conversation all together, and then make a prudent decision. So in terms of course offerings, we want to make sure that we reinforce that, and this was very important for me last year, it's important for me today, that we reinforce that option as parents, as partners in this decision. Points of contact. If you have questions about scheduling, your your child's counselor. If you have questions overall about like the high school program, you can talk to Dr. Walsh or Ms. Ramsey. For the middle school program, Ms. Ramsey, as Director of Guidance, can talk equally fluidly about the high school or middle school program, or you can talk to Ms. McGinn. If you have questions about special education, Ms. Love is available. Questions about curriculum, Dr. Moriarty. And then we have any other questions that you might say in terms of vision or anything else. You can always contact me about any of the questions you have about the new course offerings. So that is my presentation about the course offerings. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for constantly looking at our district curriculum offerings and course offerings, K-12, and looking at ways that we're currently serving our students and potentially how we might better serve our students. Couple of questions that I have, and then I'll turn it over to the board for their comments and questions. So for Spanish 1 and 2, you saw the need to bring that in. Why not French 1 and 2? Is there not a need, or?
I would say it's probably a little bit less of a need for French 1 and 2. For the students that transfer in, predominantly most of those students do not take French or ask to take French. They usually ask to take Spanish. So that was our rationale for picking one area to do that, because most of the students, again, that are new to the district take Spanish.
Okay, thank you. At the high school, the personal finance class, is that a half-year course?
Yeah, half-year course.
Okay, and any grade is able to take it, 9 through 12?
Yep.
Okay. It's a nice opportunity then to build on their 7th grade experience from the middle school. So again, that vertical alignment, looking to make those connections, I think is really important. For TOK, the 2-year TOK class, I'm glad to hear that. I do think it's important. Part of the rationale for bringing it down to the year 1 students in the IB diploma program was to expose them to the concepts and the ideas from day 1, really, in the program. So I'm really happy to hear that. And I'm also happy that we're opening it up to any student that wants to take it, not just our full diploma candidates, the way that we've historically done that. At our last meeting, we talked about that idea of writing in particular in grades 8, 9, 10. So I'm happy to see some of the course offerings at the middle school, I think, are capturing that in grade 8. Just hopefully we can look also to continue to bolster our 9, 10 as well, just to continue that continuum, really, or make that continuum more explicit as we move forward. Then, thank you for instituting the 10th grade counselor meetings. I do think it's important that any parent or caregiver knows at any point to contact their counselor. The 10th grade in particular, going into 11th and 12th grade, where the options become so much more varied and intricate, I think it's an added addition, it's a welcome added addition, so thank you. Comments or questions, board members?
Yes, a couple of specifics and then general. In terms of at the high school, currently this year, we're offering AP Computer Science Principles. Next year, we'll offer that as well as AP Computer Science. Is the Principles class a prerequisite for the next class, or not necessarily?
It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but generally speaking, the sequence that is recommended is that you take AP CSP or principles before you take AP CSA, which is AP Computer Science. The programming requirements in AP CSP are not to the level that they are for AP CS. So the AP CS course is really object-based programming in Java, which is substantially more complicated than you would see in the AP CSP class, which is more theoretical, where they're introduced to things like loops and they're introduced to general programming principles.
Okay, that makes sense. So you might try it in principles, see if it's something, and then when you're driving forward with it, you might move into the regular without the principles. In terms of the Python and then the AI prompt engineering, it seems to me that Python is going to be a technical class, but maybe AI prompt engineering, not necessarily for those technical-minded students, but maybe more humanities general?
You bring up an outstanding point. Yes, our computer science teachers will be teaching the Python class. Our ELA or social studies teachers that are familiar with TOK will be most likely teaching the prompt engineering class. The reason being, we want not just technical expertise, but we want the idea that you need to be able to ask great questions to generate great responses. So that's really important in the context of AI and programs like ChatGPT or other different models like Bard. or Gemini, whatever you would use in that class, but you want to be able to ask great questions. So our students are very well versed in asking great questions, particularly those that have taken IB classes, because they learn to see between the different domains. So in terms of what's the technical expertise, you need some technical expertise to work within prompt engineering. You do not need a tremendous amount of technical expertise to work with it. You do need a substantial amount in Python. So you need to understand those specific languages, those specific prompts. And it's good to know that there's also AI built into the Python class in the software program that we use called KidOyo. So that actually gives students feedback about why this program is not running right now, what's the error. And it will help them go through. It's almost like a built-in tutor to it. So we're hopeful that their programming skills evolve rapidly with that additional piece and component.
Okay, so in the AI prompt engineering, you're learning the tools, but not necessarily how to make a tool.
You can actually ask ChatGPT to write you a Python program and say, can you write me a Python program where a picture of a squirrel flies across the screen. It will do that as long as you give it the picture of the squirrel. But you have to be able to ask those questions and frame it in a way to get the piece that you want. Also important in that piece is, do you know if it works or not? So we have both sides of that equation, because we would have the ability to take that, put it in our Python editor, and find out whether or not it works. So we feel really well prepared for that, and we see the intersection between coding, asking great questions that our IB program does, and all of the pieces are kind of fitting together.
On that note of being well prepared to teach these sort of classes, I appreciate one of your earlier slides talking about the collaborative nature of putting these new classes forward. And I really appreciate and think about the teachers who have the ability and the encouragement and the resources to step forward and say, this is important and I'd like to teach it and I'm interested in it. Because when we think about, as parents, or when we talk to I'm sure when you talk to the students in focus groups, or we talk to our students, our children at home, as they start to develop their academic interests, so often they point to, well, why are you interested in that? Well, let me tell you how excited my teacher is about it, right? So really, the teachers light that spark and our students respond to it. So it's so important for me to hear that teachers are stepping forward, raising their hand and saying, I want to develop this. And as a board, we want to help continue to give you resources and manage, support so that they can do that. Having said that, I also feel that every time we, are intentional and careful about adding new options at every level, we are adding to the load on our guidance counselors, right? Our school counselors have to know the ins and outs of a lot of these pieces and how they would work together. And thinking back to the survey results about student stress and anxiety, once you have a high school student and you see a source sometimes of their stress and anxiety is putting together the actual schedule. And so I think your point is well taken about starting with the guidance counselor. I want to make sure that we're giving support to the guidance counselors, and is there anything else that we can be doing to make sure they feel supported in guiding students and parents in these decisions?
So our next step, if everything is approved, we want to bring it to the board and have the approval going forward. The next step after that is to have meetings at both the high school level and the middle school level, and jointly with our guidance counselors say, these are the new things. These are how things fit together. I think it's not only important for the high school guidance counselors to understand, if you take prompt engineering, what aren't you taking, or where are you not going, what are the other interests that you have, but it's also really important for our middle school as they guidance counselors as they choose their elective in, say, 8th grade. If they're very much interested in that AI research in the AI age, what could they take in the high school that's very similar to that if it's something that's a passion? And you can take a digital society, you can take a prompt engineering. Like, there are definite pathways that you can take to foster that interest. Same thing goes last year when we added robotics. Like, we had a robotics class as an elective. There's a huge club here at the high school with renewed energy, with a new teacher. So that's monitoring that, or excuse me, that's leading that club. So how do we show the different opportunities that connect curricular to extracurricular or co-curricular activities? And that's really important for our guidance counselors to know and understand. That's why Ms. Ramsey has been a part of a lot of these discussions. So for example, when we first started talking at the high school level, Ms. Ramsey was right in the meeting with everyone, and we talked about that importance. But with the approval of the board, with the new course offerings, our next step is to sit with the guidance counselors and talk about how these pieces fit together.
Good, thank you.
It's funny you said that, because that's one of the things that I had written down was how comfortable are the middle school counselors, because I do think the 8th grade piece especially, especially now that we're potentially giving multiple different options, I think it is really important that a conversation start, not that you're choosing your path forever, but just that you understand like what some things to think about are as you're moving forward. Even something as like I know both my kids loved the digital photography class, right? And now if that moves to be an elective, that's just something else to consider. And I know there's also photography at the high school. So like maybe if you don't pick that in 8th grade, you could still get it in 9th grade or 10th grade or 11th grade. There's a lot of that needs to be coordinated. So I'm glad to hear that the middle school counselors are going to be part of that. A couple other just questions. So I also had a question about the Spanish 1, 2. I know for a couple of years, there's been a lot of conversation about, on the special ed side, about kids sometimes having to drop off their foreign language for to take whatever support classes they needed. And so in my head, this might offer an opportunity for them to pick back up. Is it possible, are we considering it as an ICT course or no?
I think we'll have to look at the students that enroll in that class before we make a determination. That would be something that would be determined at the IEP level as well. So, and the annual review, if 7 students decide to take Spanish 1, 2 next year, and there are students that require ICT, that's up to us to try to figure that out.
Okay, I would like to, if the numbers are there and the interest is there, I would just like to throw that out as something to keep in mind. And sort of related to that, I know we had a lot of trouble with the sign language course that also kind of evolved due to that need of not having a foreign language option. Or where are we on that? Do we have?
So we went through the process of creating a deaf culture class. That's the course that we have been in the process of designing. One of the things we did this year, since we couldn't run it during the first semester, we reached out November 1st to all of our students saying that for the second semester, starting at the end of January, that we would have the deaf culture option during X period. What period was it, Patrick? 6th period, okay. 6th period. When we didn't get too many takers from emailing from parents and students, we then emailed parents and students that had 6th period free and said, hey, by the way, there's another elective if you so choose. We didn't get too many takers for that either. Then what we did was we called down all of the students that have registered during the summer for ASL and asked them, said, hey, we have this elective, here's where it is, are you interested in it? Right now, for next semester, we do not have enrollment to run that class.
Okay.
So, and we didn't have the enrollment, we had 1 student interested, and when presented to that parent that there was 1 student interested, that parent opted to keep that student in their other scheduled class.
Okay.
We still plan on offering the deaf culture class next year. So with enough lead time, we are still going to offer the deaf culture class. And it'll be offered again as a half-year class for next year.
Okay.
A couple other small little things like anatomy and physiology, we had right now is an every other day class for the full year. It's going to be a half-year elective. So we found that those electives, when you run on half years every day, are better to schedule and more consistent for the kids.
Okay. And just since this is my first time through the process, what exactly is the process? Like everyone registers and then you look at numbers and make an ultimate decision, whether you have the numbers to support some of these classes? Is that how it goes?
Generally speaking, so if absolutely no one enrolls in the research in the artificial intelligence age class, then we won't run that class. If we get no enrollment or low enrollment in English 12, for example, which I don't think we will, I think we'll have enough for like English 12, then we would look at that enrollment as well, and we would have to make a determination. Generally speaking, last year when we talked about Math 8 and we talked about Science 8, we were in the 8 to 15 range as like a band for where we would run that class in terms of enrollment. That's generally speaking where I would probably make that recommendation consistent again. It's important to note that all of these course offerings, we're not adding any staff. So all of these course offerings are built with existing staff. So we don't need to go hire another computer science teacher to do this. We don't need to go hire a Spanish teacher to do this. I mean, if somebody retires, that would be different, but in terms of actual FTE and the number of staff, we're not recommending any additional staff.
Okay, and then just two other just quick comments. I just wanted to say the personal finance, I think it's great that we, and the seventh grade business, like
Theme.
conglomerate,
Theme.
whatever. I've spoken to a couple of parents who had their kids at Commerce Plaza recently, and the kids, like, I mean, they loved it. And so I think there's I mean, I know the business classes at the high school are already very popular, but I think there's like a real interest. So I'm excited to see that those fifth graders have something to look to in middle school. So thank you for that. And my one other question, I don't remember, so I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I echo thank you for adding Spanish 1 and 2. I think that's a long time requested, so I think that will make a lot of families happy. Just curious how the Italian edition last year ended up for us in terms of world languages.
In terms of enrollment,
Yeah, enrollment.
how many sections? One
One
section.
section?
Yeah.
Okay. Have we ever talked about expanding world languages beyond the current language offerings that we have, going into some different languages?
Well, I think right now, one of the stresses on adding when we talk about how we develop classes is, do we have the faculty preparation for that? So for example, a problem that across Long Island and New York State right now are trying to find unique language teachers for different subjects. So for example, French is really hard to find right now. A French teacher is really hard to find. Spanish teacher, a little bit easier to find, someone that speaks Spanish. Italian, probably in the middle between the two. And then some other low incidence languages like, say for Mandarin, that is extraordinarily hard to find. Someone who's certified and actually has the language skills to go with it, so you kind of need both.
Okay. I know that would require extra staff, so I understand you're trying to build your course selection within your existing staff, but just was curious if it's coming up in conversation, because it's always kind of risen to our level over the years of people being interested in that area.
I think Ms. Green at the high school has lots of ideas about language.
Good.
And part of this is her conversation with our language teachers at the high school about Spanish 1 and 2, and they felt in terms of priority needs this year,
Yep.
that was it.
Yeah, I could see that.
But I'm sure that once the teachers have felt like they've been listened to, and that goes back to what Dr. Downing was saying before, that they feel that culture of let's try something new, and I'm going to be able to run with it if it's good for kids, and it's something that's fiscally responsible. I think, that's really important to build as a culture, so your point is really well taken.
No, and I appreciate that, because I do think that I agree with the prioritizing of Spanish 1 and 2 for right now, but I don't want the conversation to end
Sure.
here, that we've kind of checked off, we added a language recently, we added this now, and that we don't continue to have those conversations. So I'm happy to hear our administration's having those. In that same vein, I have to ask this question. I feel like we're getting very robotics, coding, digital heavy, and I'm curious about conversations around a general engineering course, a general math and science combo, because to Mrs. Barry's point, as you start to plan for IB, we sat through presentations of if your student is interested in this, these are, suggested coursework that I think that they should take, or in maths and sciences, or whatever it may be with the higher level and the standard level. Are we kind of, and this is really a question, because I don't know, I'm looking through the course catalog and I'm not sure, but are we kind of missing a general engineering course within our course offering, and now we're kind of going more on the digital side?
Well, let me answer that in 2 ways. Number one, we have had the conversation about a general engineering course and how it would fit in. There's a lot of the components of engineering that fit in certain different math classes and in certain different computer science classes. So there are components of it. We want to make sure that we have someone who's very comfortable in teaching it in terms of an entire engineering course. And we want to make sure that we're well prepared to do it. It's something that has been in conversation. Right now, it's not something that I think we feel well prepared to offer as a great student experience, but it's something that we're working towards, no doubt.
Okay, I appreciate it, because I feel like within that realm, there's so many different levels of engineering, and where we're like really excelling on the computer science side of things and the digital side of things, but I just want to make sure we still have those natural maths and science courses. I also agree, I'm really happy about the personal finance ones. I think anything that we can do to give our kids life skills that are applicable to them for their life, I think are great, so I'm happy to see the introduction of that. Maybe in the future, we can get an idea of how long some of these courses are. So I'm assuming outside of like a Spanish 1 and 2 or an ELA 12 or whatever that we're talking about electives, so are they all half years, or some of them half, some every other day?
Both. So
Both.
for example, digital society is every day. That's an
Okay.
everyday class. English 12 is an everyday class.
Right.
Spanish, an everyday class.
Right,
Art, the art portfolio is every other day. The unified art is every other day. What else am I missing? The electives at the middle school are every other day. The components in exploratory, so for example, art is very limited to 10 weeks within that exploratory for 6th grade. So that's not really a half year or not, it's really a quarter. And the rotations for the 7th grade exploratory are about 12 weeks apiece, 12 to 13 weeks apiece, kind of give or take, depending on where the breaks fall.
okay.
So in terms of the overall piece, we have a kind of a mix of both. And what we're trying to offer students is the ability to say, I'm taking a class that might be a period and a half, I need something on the other side of that half period, what could that class be? Here are a number of things that I'm potentially interested in. I think one of the things that we heard pretty loud and clear from the students and the parents in our climate survey last year was they were looking for more options. So this would be something along those lines that allowed for that rigor and relevance at the same time. I think the relevance thing was really, really important. If we remember our student responses from last year, they want real world stuff, which is why you see such a push for kids into business classes or finance classes. They see a real connection to that. So coding, we did not have really, except for one class last year. Next year, we will have built it. I don't see us going much more beyond that in terms of like how many more classes we could add. Down the road, maybe engineering/robotics or something like that, where you're doing engineering as part of a project or a unified project. I could see something along those lines or evolving to that. But we also want to see, because if you think about it, we've added, I think, about 12 new classes at the high school. We want to see, eventually we're going to run out of kids. So we want to make sure that we don't, outkick our coverage, to use a football metaphor. That we want to make sure that we have enough students and enrollment to offer these classes to enough kids to make it cost effective at the same time, if that helps.
Yeah, it does, because I think people are going to want to have a sense of what the commitment is, and because you're talking about high school students, we have this lunch issue. They feel compelled, a lot of students, to skip the lunch because they want to fit all of these things in. So I'm trying to get a sense of how often these things meet, or because we want to keep kids understanding how to choose their schedules wisely for themselves, what fits them. Shifting to the middle school, I'm excited about the exploratory shifts. I'm really happy about the art introduction with 6th grade. I think the exploratory shifts make sense for 7th. For 8th grade, the elective options Are any of these offered for high school credit, like the art or food science, nothing like that?
The two ones that we're proposing for this year are not high school
Okay,
credit.
so the ones that,
Yeah.
the existing ones we have are staying the
The-
way that they are,
the-
and we're adding these as just
Yes.
electives, not credit electives?
Yep, yep.
Okay. And then my only last thing was, and it came up in conversation over the retreat when we were talking, if we could just get it, if the board can get, and I think the community, some sense of what our sixth grade Strat Life curriculum looks like, because now that we're talking about all these different exploratory options and the subjects, the titles, we're talking about career, finance, all these things, I think it would be good for all of us to have a sense of the topics that are covered in sixth grade Strat Life.
Sure,
So-
we can do at one of our future meetings, I think the next one, we only have one presentation instead of three, so I think next presentation, we can kind of provide a quick overview of what Strat Life looks like.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it, thank you.
Dr. M? Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the addition of these classes. I think that they are a great response to the wants and needs of our students. Spanish 1 and 2, I think, will go a long way to help many of our students earn that credit that they need. And I like the electives that are being added too. I appreciate that we're continuing to grow our computer science offerings for students who are engaged in those types of courses. And I also appreciate that we're adding math at the middle school. I do have a couple of questions to piggyback off of Mrs. Gruner for ASL. I do understand we're offering the deaf culture elective. Are we still continuing to search for an ASL teacher? Because I know at the beginning of this year, we had 2 full sections of students who were signed up for ASL because that's what they wanted. The deaf culture, while I think probably highly important and informative, that's not where the students are leaning. And the ASL, as we know, can also serve for language credit for many of our students who would otherwise be language exempt. So to me, it feels like a real priority that we are continuing that search for that teacher.
Yes, the short answer is yes, we continue that search. We post intermittently. We have received, I don't think, any responses to that post on OLAS. But we can certainly redo that again and do it periodically over the next spring and into the summer to make sure that we're doing it. We've also reached out to the different schools for the deaf to see if there's anyone there that might look to come to here. We have not found any takers right now that would be certified ASL.
Okay.
But it's not something that I think it would be a dead end. The deaf culture class is something that we were looking to provide for our students interested in that arena with a properly certified teacher. We will offer one of the two. If we were able to get an ASL teacher, that would be optimum. But if we're not, we have the deaf culture offering for next year.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd really love to see us have ASL for credit. And then to Mrs. Hackett's point about other languages like Mandarin as well. I just wonder, like, do we reach out to other school districts who offer these? Like, I know Plainview Old Bethpage offers both ASL and Mandarin. They actually start Mandarin as like their FLES program, which is interesting. But are we reaching out? Maybe, I don't know if there's a way that we could, I don't know what the custom of like sharing teachers are, but there are other districts who have these teachers and have these programs.
So, Ms. Green is really plugged into the administrators that oversee the foreign language departments. We recently hosted a professional development for foreign language teachers here in Southside during Superintendent's Conference Day, and we're constantly looking out to see if we are exemplifying best practices. That being said, have we asked other districts specifically about Mandarin? I can't fully answer if we've answered specifically about Mandarin, but I know we've had conversations about how do you do language, particularly FLES. So one of the things we talked about was, how do you do FLES in different districts? Are we aligned with best practices? And I don't know exactly if we've asked about Mandarin in particular. I do know from talking to other superintendents where Mandarin is an option, that it is not easy to staff. That I
I'm
know.
sure it's not. I just,
Did I miss anything, Dr.
No,
Brown?
we've made multiple gestures with ASL to anyone within a 50-mile radius. If they're willing to share, the problem is usually that if they're so sought after, that teachers are unwilling to do the travel. They are losing financially as well as time. It's a hard sell, but we'll continue to do so. We tried Mandarin a few years ago. to similar avail. That's not to say it's futile, but it's just a challenge.
Thank you. I also have a question about writing at the middle level. You know, thinking back to the surveys and talking about looking at the values and skills that our parents wrote in about writing was definitely up at the top. So I do wonder if it's worth considering, obviously, we're going to teach writing within the content areas, but like we have a math lab and an English lab in grade 6. I'm wondering if there's potentially thought of putting in a explicit writing lab somewhere in the middle school, maybe in grade 7 or grade 8, where students are able to get continuous, repetitive exposure to different types of writing
Are you talking about
Feedback.
as a course?
as a
or-
required course.
Okay.
Yes.
We haven't had that conversation as an explicit course, but we have talked about different ways to support student writing and enhance student writing. Matter of fact, one of the things we've been talking about as an administrative team and as a board is this something that we want to put a focus on as an overall overarching board goal. We are going to do a presentation later on in this year, at the end of the year, about some of the different types of writing that we do across the curriculum areas and across the grade levels. That, I believe, is in June. I think I've informed the board of this. So that could be a kicking off point to a discussion about how do we support writing, which of course may lend itself at some point to thinking about specific classes.
Okay. And then my last comment, I'm disappointed that we don't have a Math 7 class and that it is not on a course that we are offering. I know we talked about this, or I talked about this at the board retreat, and I've certainly talked about this at other board meetings before. But I'm going to share a quote really quickly from one of my more favorite documents. It's called Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine prior to the American Revolution. He starts by saying, "Perhaps the sentiments contained in the following pages are not yet sufficiently fashionable to procure them general favor. A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance in being right, and raises at first a formidable outcry in defense of custom. In the following pages, I offer nothing more than simple facts, plain arguments, and common sense." I appreciate that after the break, I was given the opportunity to review the math curriculum, which was just rewritten. And again, I sincerely appreciate the effort that went into making sure that we are teaching the standards that are prescribed by the state in grades 6 through 8. My purpose in wanting to review their curriculum was to understand how it's aligned. Where are we teaching standards? What does that look like? And I asked at our last board meeting about curriculum, if it's compacted and how it's compacted. After reviewing the curriculum, it's very clear that our 6 through 8, really 6 through 9, because algebra is pushed in, curriculum is significantly compacted, specifically in grade 7. We're taking 50% of the 8th grade standards and teaching them in grade 7, combined with the majority of the 7th grade standards. The question that I have is, we've now created this 8th grade math course. Thank you. Thank you for putting that in there. But in looking at how our curriculum is aligned, the course now seems, to an extent, pointless because it's completely repetitive. So our 7th graders are learning half of the 8th grade curriculum in grade 7. They are then relearning that curriculum in grade 8. They're learning the rest of the 8th grade curriculum in grade 8, which they are then relearning in algebra. So this class that is created essentially to slow down for students who need that. And if we look at our data, there are many students who would benefit from slowing down. I know they're not enrolled in the class, all of them, but there are many. And we are essentially giving them this time to just repeat and pre-learn what we're going to reteach them. And then that algebra course is still the combination of the 8th grade standards and all of the algebra standards, 77 standards. It's a lot. If we have an 8th grade class, to make it meaningful, it should be paired with a 7th grade class. After 6th grade, students should be able to make a choice. Am I going to go into an accelerated 7th grade class, because that is what we are offering. The curriculum in that class is an accelerated curriculum. Or am I going to take the grade 7, grade 8 curriculum, and then I'll tackle algebra as just algebra, not a combination of grade 8 and algebra in 9th grade, to set me up so that I can be successful in mathematics. And we might have the majority of our students who elect to go into the accelerated path, which is great, and that's their choice. But as a parent of a public school child, I want the choice to enroll my child into a grade level class. I don't think it's fair, and I don't think it's right to push children into this course that is accelerated pace-wise, to then say, okay, you can slow down and repeat, and then we'll just push you forward again. We have to do this the right way. You know, in talking about how we design classes, there were a couple of things that came up. Using data to inform practice. I could go through the data. I will not subject you all to that again. But I can confidently tell you there are at least 50 kids who are currently in the 6th grade based on their 3 through 5 data that suggest a 7th grade math class would be very, very appropriate for them. And I'd argue that it's more than that, if they chose to do that. I also wonder about post-secondary implications, right? The number one reason kids drop out of college is because they can't pass freshman level math. And if you're not prepared in middle school to do well in high school math, you will struggle throughout, and then that becomes a problem. And the third one is living up to our mission. The last sentence of our mission statement says, the district will provide a safe, nurturing environment in which individual and civic responsibility is fostered, diversity is respected, and all students are enabled to realize their full potential. And I question the idea of a safe, nurturing environment. To me, putting a child in a class that they are not cognitively ready for does not feel psychologically safe. It feels like we're putting unnecessary stress and anxiety. We're subjecting children to unproductive struggle that could result in negative self-esteem. And it leads to exclusion from potentially preferred classes because they're stuck in support classes or they're stuck repeating courses. I don't think acceleration for all is nurturing for all students. It's not giving them the time they need to develop within their respective zones of proximal development. I don't think it respects cognitive diversity, and it certainly does not enable all students to reach their full potential. And we talked a little bit about that in looking at the Algebra 2 Regents results. There were a significant number of children who did not even take the Regents, perhaps because they're repeating courses, perhaps because they didn't enroll in math. And then of those that took, there was sorry, I don't have this here. There was a significant number of kids who did not pass. So 10% didn't pass, and of those 90% that did, over 50% of them scored below an 80. I can't believe that's the potential of the children in this district. So I'm really asking, I want to have a conversation about Math 7. I know in retreat we said, well, we'll have to talk about it. Like, I want to talk about it because I feel like I've been saying the same thing for 3 years and we don't talk about it. I'm glad we got the Math 8 class, but I need that class to be meaningful. And right now, the way that it's aligned, it doesn't feel meaningful to me. So I'd like to have the conversation about it. I'd like to make sure that we have pathways in place for kids in mathematics that are going to help them to be successful. Thank you.
So your point is well taken. So we have a math curriculum review process that we're currently undergoing, which is a year-long process, that we can certainly have that conversation with our teachers. I think one of the things you have pointed out to me in the past is that are we asking our teachers how they feel about certain things, and we can certainly do that. Our rationale, my rationale last year for recommending the 8th grade class was in response to a point that you made that was well taken. Why are we rushing our students to a class that counts on their transcript in 8th grade? So parents should have the option, if they feel like they're not ready, particularly coming out of the pandemic, which I agree was a mitigating circumstance. Why would we put something or allow those students no option on something that may potentially be on their transcript? The 7th grade doesn't present an issue for that in terms of the transcript. So my rationale for me was, in light of the pandemic, in light of the interrupted or different math instruction that students have had over the pandemic, and the opportunity to put it on the transcript, for me, allowed the opportunity to give an 8th grade class. We can certainly have the conversation. I do know that there are many benefits to our students that happen at the high school and post-secondary as a result of that year of algebra in 8th grade, including 80% of our kids taking a college-level math class in the high school, which is extraordinarily outpaces most of New York State, most of national averages in terms of that. I think the other component that we often don't consider is that extra year of high school math in 8th grade often leads to outsized exam scores or better exam scores in terms of math SATs. So the average math SAT, our average math SAT is between the 64th and 72nd percentile in terms of math SAT. The only reason I point that out is because one of the things that if you look at the Department of Education study, they will tell you that only 24% of our students take algebra, and that it's all 24% of students nationwide take algebra in the 8th grade. And they liken this as a problem of equity as well. So we want to try to make sure that while we give our students that opportunity in 8th grade, if they need more time to work on that, to prepare for algebra in 9th grade, we have it. Right now, I would say that our curriculum that was rewritten makes sure that all of our students have a period and a half in 6th grade, which is why we have the opportunity to move some of the 7th grade standards, the aligned 7th grade standards, down to 6th. I also think that the 7th grade math curriculum is very well aligned. It prepares the kids for both options in terms of algebra or the math aid. So I'm not ruling anything out, and we're certainly welcome to have the conversation, but I do want to let everyone know that there are strong reasons for doing algebra in 8th grade that lead to excellent outcomes for kids.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin. Not to tack on to the list of things we've asked you to report back, but I would ask that at some point in the future, once the scheduling process is finalized, if you could just give us a report in terms of a number of course requests for these new courses, so that we
Sure.
can kind of see how many students took advantage of all of the new course offerings that we're having at the middle and high school.
Sure.
Primarily, and understanding that the enrollment might not be a true indication of that, especially at the high school level, because a student requests it, they might not be able to get it, given
Yep.
some constraints with the master schedule or however it plays out. So I think it would be important for us to gain a sense of just the level of interest, even if it doesn't end up on their finalized schedule.
Sure.
So I would appreciate that, just to keep the conversation going.
We can run that sometime April? Or you want
Course
to?
requests will be done by February,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
whether they get the personnel will be later.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have to put a timeline on it, but at some point, it
Sure.
would just be interesting to the board, I think,
Sure.
to gain a sense of where we're at in terms of our student interests in the new course offerings. Thank you.
Sure.
Can I
Thank you,
ask
everyone.
one quick follow-up question, just about the math? The way it's like set up now, if a student had elected to start the year in algebra and just for whatever reason decided it wasn't for them, can they move to the 8th grade math course
The
currently?
conversation would start with the guidance counselor and the math teacher with the parent. That we've modeled the 8th grade component here to have the opportunity to move the same way the high school does it. So there's a set time where, I believe, what's the date on when you can't drop anymore and change? Like November, first quarter, something like that?
First quarter.
First quarter.
We do allow level changes at different parts of the year.
So they have that ability, so if a parent had any question and were struggling in algebra, all they'd have to do is contact their guidance counselor, have that conversation with the teacher, and then go from there and talk to the administration to make a change.
Okay, I mean, it's something to think about, what Ms. Messio was saying, but I think it also just reinforces the importance of the connect parent, counselor, teacher conversation, just whether or not we end up offering a 7th grade math class, but for any class, being able to have a conversation with the teacher who knows your child, who knows what's coming, with the guidance counselor who can talk about what this might mean for the choices you'll then have in high school. Like, all of that is invaluable information for a parent who's trying to decide what the best placement is for their child. And so I just want to make sure that we can facilitate those conversations, and that parents, in particular parents of kids who are going to be potentially making the choice, feel like they have an avenue. It's great that we have this, right? But back to the theme of communication and making sure that we're getting the word out. Like, I really feel strongly that it's important that parents have an opportunity to have, and I think the parent-teacher conference element is a good step in that direction also, but that's, you know, not always you don't always have enough time to discuss what you want to discuss. So like, just keeping it in mind as
Yep.
kids are picking their courses.
I think that spring conference is another avenue for people, and we can even reinforce that in the letter. So even though Math 8 and Science 8 are not new courses, they'll still be outlined in the letter to parents from the middle school about what courses are available, and we'll make sure that we include a sentence or include the information that if you have questions, ask during your parent-teacher conference in the spring.
And, yeah.
So we're going to try to get those out in either early February, I think those letters go out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Turning to policies, we have 3 policies at stage 3 this evening. Policy 1251, student voter registration and pre-registration. Okay to move this to approval at the next meeting?
Yes.
7514, health records.
Yep.
Yes.
7520, accidents and medical emergencies.
Yes.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the minutes as listed on the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Can I have a motion to approve the financial reports as listed on the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Can I have a motion to approve receipts of financial reports as listed on the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Can I have a motion to approve board actions A through F?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Can I have a motion to approve item for action letter G?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm abstaining.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Item for action, we have a walk-on item this evening. Item for action will be letter H. Since one of the duties of the Board of Education is to approve all individual education plans for the district, the board thought it was prudent to institute a special education committee. This committee will be able to do important work, such as determining whether there are any patterns or need for revision to the district's special education program. I'll read the resolution. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education establishes the Special Education Committee and appoints the following board members to serve on such committee. I will ask Mrs. Hackett and Mrs. Messier if you can serve on that committee, please. Yes? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve item for action letter H?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much for serving on that committee. Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Our next meeting is February 1st. And it's to celebrate, is that correct? Yes? And that's a regular meeting.
Regular meeting.
Yep. Thank you. Have a good night.